Okay, welcome everybody. Um, okay, everybody can hear me good? Thumbs up, you can hear? Okay, good thumbs up. Okay, so this week's class is going to be about Lag Baomer because today is Lag Baomer, which is a good opportunity to talk about Lag Baomer. Also, we can do it actually on the day. The class is on Tuesday, no matter what. Um, it kind of we're kind of I don't know for those who've been on for most of these classes, it's already our third or fourth. We're kind of keeping a theme. We're talking about the Spheros Omer. So our first class we talked about Spheros Omer. Last week we talked about Pesach Sheni, second Passover. That was also occurs during this time of the Spheros Omer. So today we're going to talk about Lag Omer, which is today. Is which Lag is Hebrew for 33rd. It's a numerical value of the number 33. So today is the 33rd in Minnesota. I still have another half an hour or so. It's still the 33rd day of the Omer. Like we talked about, just to recap a little bit, right? We talked about the Omer is the count that we count from Passover till the Shavuos holiday, which is coming up the end of May this year. Um, and we count 49 days, right? We count up towards from the Exodus towards the giving of the Torah. And so today, in that count, is the 33rd day. So what is special about the 33rd day? So there's a couple things that are special about the 33rd day of the Omer, and it's celebrated as a holiday. So the first thing that happened during this, going back, taking a step back, that happened during this Omer time, is that during the time of the Second Temple or post-Second Temple, right around there, in the era of the end of the Second Temple, the Rabbi Akiva, who was one of the most famous rabbis in the times of the Mishnah, um, he um, he had a tremendous following. He had 24,000 students at that time, and there was a tremendous plague, and they all died, all 24,000 students. So, kind of, we're also in a kind of a plague epidemic kind of situation now. So, it's kind of, I guess we could sort of relate. Obviously, it was very specific, it only affected the students, Rabbi Akiva. But during this period of the Omer, 24,000 students died. And on the day of Lag BaOmer, on this day, about 2,000 years ago, the plague stopped. So that is one reason for the celebration on this day. And the second reason for the celebration on this day is that it's also the day of the passing of it's called the Yom Hilula, the day of celebration, is a literal translation, but it's the day of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon was one also very famous rabbi in the times of the Mishnah. Um, and he was actually as well a student of Rabbi Akiva. He was part of a second wave of students that we'll talk about shortly. And he was the author of the Zohar, and the Zohar was also written or authored, I should say, on this day, on the 33rd day of the Omer. And so we see here. So again, we know that the day of the passing of a righteous person is considered a celebratory day. Why? Because a person passes away for two reasons. Either because they did something wrong, right? People are God punishes people, and usually people pass away, and especially righteous people, because their mission in this world has been completed, and especially a righteous person, right? They didn't do anything wrong. So why do they pass away? Because their mission in the world is completed. So really, the day of their passing represents the culmination of their work in this world. So it's a tremendous opportunity and a day that kind of shows on their accomplishments in their lifetime. So in fact, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai specifically said that this day should be a day of happiness. It shouldn't be a day of sadness, even if he passed away. And to this day, it is celebrated in Israel, where he's buried in Meron, Israel. Usually, obviously, this year is kind of small celebration due to the current health crisis, but in general, tens and tens of thousands of people converge upon the his burial site in Meron. People make bonfires, and it's a tremendous celebration. So taking a step back, so we see that this day is very much connected to Rabbi Akiva. Again, it's the day that his students stopped stopped dying, and right, and then later it's this day, the celebratory day of his student Rabbi Shimon. Now, let's talk about Rabbi Akiva for a minute. that we're seeing this day is very much connected to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was actually very famously was illiterate. That means he didn't know how to read or write until he was age 40. Age 40, he did not know how to read or write, which in our current society is probably fairly uncommon. But in those times, generally people, if they weren't in, if they didn't go to school, if they went into trades, they generally didn't have an opportunity and they never learned. And he didn't know nothing. He didn't even know the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the aleph. And in fact, he was the son of a convert, so he didn't have any lineage to back him up, right? He had no, so essentially he was the ultimate, what do they call it? And nowadays they would call him the ultimate victim, right? He didn't right, and he didn't have any lineage. He was very poor as well. He had no money. And to make a very, very, very long story short, Rabbi Akiva basically overcame all these things when he had a epiphany. What was his epiphany? He was a shepherd. He said he was shepherds are not a well-paid position. It's very expendable, right? It's kind of the equivalent of the modern flipping burgers, right? Anybody could do it. Anybody is willing to do it. And in a bad economy, you can get anybody, right? So Rabbi Akiva was a shepherd, right, bottom of the totem pole. And one day he's been encouraged to study Torah, but he was illiterate. He was 40 years old. He didn't have any lineage. He had no money, and so he didn't take the opportunity. He didn't feel like he had an opportunity. So he went and he was walking through his fields where he was shepherding the sheep. He saw a water fall, and the waterfall had bored a hole into a specific rock. And this rock had a hole in it. And Rabbi Akiva had an epiphany that if the rock, which is very hard material, could be penetrated by the water, which is the ultimate of soft material, right? You can't even get water to get into any shape or form. And if the water could penetrate the rock, then surely the Torah could penetrate his head. And in other words, what was it? It was because the water was persistent and it kept on coming and dripping and dripping and dripping for who knows how many tens or hundreds of years. And because of that, it bored a hole into the rock. So he said the same thing with Torah, right? The Torah is compared to water, and so the Torah can penetrate his head. And he left his shepherding. He ended up marrying into a very wealthy family, and his whole life changes, right? He becomes this nobody, nothing shepherd. So Rabbi Akiva is, in fact, most of our Torah today comes from Rabbi Akiva and his students. You could say his five main students, including Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which we discussed, they're the most quoted rabbis in the entire Talmud. Okay, in the entire Mishnah, the entire Talmud, we're talking. The fact that we have what we call the Masorah, the tradition of Jewish law, the tradition of the Torah, comes through Rabbi Akiva. And he was considered the leader of his generation, and he ends up living till 120. He was murdered by the Romans, whatever, we'll leave that for another time, right? But he becomes this uber successful rabbi, right? And not only that, like you mentioned, he married into this very wealthy family, and he himself became extremely wealthy, and his whole life changed. So one thing that we could, I guess the lesson we could learn from this whole story is that when it comes to our study of Torah, sometimes we feel like we don't have the opportunity, we don't have the time, we don't have the background, etc., etc., and or we're not interested, right? Sometimes we're just not interested. And what we can learn from Rabbi Akiva is that there's always an opportunity, obviously, but that through patience and kind of instead of seeing the forest for the trees, I guess you could say seeing the trees for the forest, basically. In other words, noticing that there's individual things, right? And that was Rabbi Akiva's kind of story. Instead of seeing the Torah as this vast amount of knowledge, he saw the individual things, right? So he saw that if I take one step at a time, I could get there. And not only that, we could see that from the fact that he studied Torah, his financial situation changed, his standing and the world changed. So even we say, oh, I'm busy with my livelihood, I'm busy with my family, and I need to work on those things before I can study the Torah. The truth is that through the study of Torah and putting, and kind of, I guess, not putting those things aside, but putting them a little bit to the side in order to focus on studying Torah, those things will improve as well. And actually, we could connect this to this week's Torah portion. I'm going to share my screen. You just bear with me. Figure out how to do this. Correctly. Here we go. Okay, now thank you. Okay, so share. Okay, so everybody can see. Oh wow, I can see this. This works good. Okay, so everybody can see. This is this week's Torah portion we have up here. And if you see can you guys see the mouse? Thumbs up if you can see the cursor. Yeah, can you see the cursor? Okay, a little bit. All right, see if I could highlight this verse in English. So in this week's Torah portion, we have it's actually two Torah portions together. It's the Torah portion of Behar and Bithul Kosai, and the one that starts the Torah portion that starts Bithul Kosai. This is the words that it starts with. I'll just do straight to English. If you follow my statutes and observe my commandments and perform them, and then God says as verse 3 and verse 4, God says, and I will give, highlight it, then I will give my rain, and he goes on with all the blessings. In other words, if you follow the commandments, God says, I'm going to give you all these blessings. And so we look at Rashi. This is in the beige box over here. Rashi is the foremost commentator on the Torah. And he highlights the words, and observe my commandments. What does that mean? And you shall study, and you shall toil in the study of Torah in order to observe the commandments. So Rashi says basically that through the study of Torah, right, that is what's going to putting effort into studying Torah, I should say. That is what's going to bring the blessings of I will give rain in their time, and verse 5 and verse 6, all the blessings that it lists off. This is all accomplished through the study and the putting into effort in Torah. So we see here that that's kind of what happened to Rabbi Akiva, right? He put a tremendous effort into his study of Torah, and not only did his he became a Torah scholar, his financial situation and his standing also grew as well. And just another kind of a little anecdote to kind of illustrate the point. Move on. We're saying that Rabbi Akiva kind of took it one day at a time. And can you guys hear? Everybody can hear? Okay. So Rabbi Akiva took it one day at a time. So I was remembering this a couple days ago. I was talking to somebody, and I remember a story that Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky, who was the Rebbe's, one of the Rebbe's secretaries and aides, and he told a story that when he first joined the Rebbe's secretariat, that he had never dealt with any of the Rebbe's correspondence or his directives, and so he was given a piece of a letter to work with, and he was told that he should type it up basically, or I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was some sort of correspondence that had to be typed up. Now, I'm going to show you over here. If you ever seen the Rebbe's handwriting, I'm just going to show you this. Okay, this is the way the Rebbe would usually answer letters. Okay, you can see besides the fact that obviously it's in Hebrew, the Rebbe didn't really write things out straight up. He would, you see here, he puts the line and then he circles it and he underlines it. If he kind of writes in between the lines, that's one example. Here's another one that's even more. This is actually, it seems like a letter that he received that he answered. And this one is an actual edit of a talk that the Rebbe gave. You can see his handwriting on the top. There's like a circle, and he's crossing out, and there's parentheses, and then there's like lines going. You can see on the bottom there's like a line that goes all the way through. Yes, it's a mess, right? It's not. It's chaotic. And this was the Rebbe style because he didn't have time to sit and write things out necessarily properly. So he would just scribble onto the margins of what he was editing. That's how he would do it, and then somebody else would type it up. So Rabbi Krinsky received this, kind of mumble jumble, and the other one of the Rebbe's secretaries who gave it to him told him just take it one line at a time, right? He said he calmed down, And he just took one line at a time. And he was able to, it took him time, obviously his first time ever dealing with something like this. And he was able to accomplish it. So he was saying, just the idea that, again, just to illustrate the point, a little anecdote that if you sometimes we get all caught up, the Torah is this giant thing, right? And like it says in Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers, in halacha hamalacha legamor. It's not upon us to finish it. So sometimes we get caught up in like the Torah is this huge, voluminous thing, and we can never ever finish it, and never just relax. Your job right now is to study what you have able to study. Tomorrow, you worry about tomorrow. Just take one line at a time. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. So, okay, that's the first lesson that we can learn from Rabbi Akiva. The second lesson we can learn from Rabbi Akiva and his students. So we mentioned this idea of this plague that happened to him and his students, and 24,000 of his students passed away during this time period, a few weeks. So why did his students pass away? So it says the reason that they were punished in such a way was that they didn't respect each other properly. And what does that mean? It basically boils down to that Rabbi Akiva's students were very passionate about Rabbi Akiva. And anybody who got in the way of saying what Rabbi Akiva was saying, they would come to his defense and they would say, how can you say that Rabbi Akiva is wrong? What was the problem is that they got so passionate about it that they couldn't even see another student's interpretation of Rabbi Akiva's own teaching. So in other words, student A would say, this is the way I understand the rabbi's teaching. Student B would say, well, I understand it a little bit differently. And they were so passionate about it, which is a good thing, obviously, but they were so excited about it that they couldn't see the other point of view in the rabbi's own teaching. And they became this festering problem within his students, and this is why they were punished. And later, like we kind of mentioned later, is that he actually rebuilt after 24,000 students. You would imagine a person who's been through so much, Rabbi Akiva, 40 years old, he finally gets it. It takes him, he actually, in order to gain these 24,000 students, he left home for 12 years. He didn't see his family for 12 years. 12 years, 24 years. It was a long time. That's the bottom line. And he left home and he comes back with all these students and they all passed away, right? And he goes back out there and he starts again, right? He didn't give up. We'll leave that for another time, that kind of a lesson. But he ends up getting more students, and you know what? He never got those 24,000 students. He never had the voluminous amount of students that he had the first time. And in the end, like we said, most of our teachings of the mission of the Talmud come from his students, but it was 5 students. They were mainly 5 students. Obviously, he had more than 5 students, but 5 main students. And however, from those first 24,000 students, not only do they pass away, you don't even have any of their material. None of it is extant to this day. We don't know what they said. We don't know what their names were. Nothing. But on the second wave of students, it's a much smaller crowd, but we have so much from them. So the second lesson is that we can learn from Rabbi Akiva's students, and specifically the second wave of students, is that if we study Torah, but we don't have the proper Avat Yisrael, the proper love for our fellow, then it all goes to naught, right? And our only success could only really be when we put in the effort, but we also respect each other. So it's a tremendous lesson that it's not just enough that we put in the effort, but we have to treat others respectfully. And that's the only way that it will last, right? That our Torah study will last. And that's the only way that our legacies go on. So what we see from here, so we mentioned in the beginning, the Sfiras Omer is the counting towards the giving of the Torah from the Exodus. And so, obviously the entire Omer calendar is getting towards, the giving of the Torah and study of Torah. But specifically on this day, on the 33rd day of the Omer, it's a tremendous opportunity for us to rededicate ourselves to the Torah. Like we said, the lesson we could learn from Rabbi Akiva and his students, and also from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the author of the Zohar. It's a special day for learning the inner, deepest, most parts of the Torah as well. it's a tremendous opportunity for them. So we should take this time and this days of the 33rd day of the Omer going forward to rededicate ourselves to the study of Torah, and God should give us the all the blessings that are mentioned in this week's Torah portion. We should get all the blessings, and which should allow us to continue to study Torah, right? And that in the end, just like Rabbi Akiva, right, started off in a situation where he didn't have anything, right? Through his study of Torah, he ends up getting a lot spiritually, physically, materially, financially, etc. So too should be with us. We should have everything we need through our rededication to the study of Torah on this day. We should have everything we need, and even more so, not just in money, right? We're talking a lot about financial story from Akiva, but also, and in this week's Torah portion, but even in health, which is something that the world needs, right? So the Torah is everything is in the Torah. So we should have the everybody who needs blessing for health, and the whole world kind of needs a blessing generally for health. So we should have that as well. Any questions, comments? You can unmute or you can type it in. Take a couple questions, and then we'll find out. Any questions? It's got to be a question. It can't be that good. You want to type something? You can sit unmute, whatever you want. No? No questions? You guys are killing me. I need some questions. Okay, so we'll hopefully. I'm just trying to think of a calendar. It should be fine for next Tuesday. I don't think anything's going to change between now and next Tuesday. Well, actually, we're the Minnesota the stay-at-home order is supposed to expire Sunday at midnight. So midnight next Sunday night, Monday early morning, jump out of bed and run around. So we'll see what happens with that. So we're still going to be continuing. We're not opening up any in-person events, even if that changes at this point. So we're still going to be doing Zoom Torah study until the holiday of Shavuos, another couple weeks. So we'll keep you posted on what the topic is. If you have any suggestions, topics, or anything, feel free to send me a message. So thank you everybody for joining. It was nice seeing everybody today, and looking forward to seeing everybody in person once the stay-at-home order lifts, and